Alright, so we're going to go ahead and pull the coil off of this, the coil pack. Now, I've explained how this coil works in another video. We can explain a little bit about the magneto and the coil pack and how they work together to create energy. But I'm going to do that in another, I'm not going to do that in this video. There are actually some other pretty good videos online that you can watch that explain that to you. So I'm just going to pull this out. We're going to pull this bolt out. It's got the ground wire hooked up to it. Got a little washer there that we've got to make sure that we keep with it. And then we've got this wire right here that has a spade connector on it. We're going to work that spade connector off of that. We'll pull this coil up out of the way. And I may have to find a special tool to get this magneto off of this engine. I don't know how to pull it. It'll fit. There it goes. And there's our coil. And then it looks like this takes a special tool that threads in here and then pushes that out. I've got some stuff like this, but I kind of doubt if I'm going to have the one for this particular engine. So we're going to look at this other side and see. It looks like this side of the crankcase will come apart. Okay, so now I've got this recoil starter pulled off, and I turn this, and it turns okay. And then it hits a spot, gets really, really tight. So we're going to go ahead and look in here, and then when you go back the other direction, it turns okay for a while and gets really tight. Tells me that we've probably got a bad bearing. So I'm going to look in here and see if we can see a bad bearing. Let me see what this is. I've got something here that makes me curious. So that is a piece of the cage for that bearing. That's what holds the rollers in the bearing in place. And that cage has been damaged pretty badly. Oh yeah, and if you look down in here, you can actually see that it's got several of the balls missing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this flywheel off. I'm going to pull this nut and see if we can get it to move. It actually takes a special tool to pull that off of there. But I'm going to see if I can get it to move really quickly. If we can't get it to move, we're going to have to either get a special tool or send this somewhere to have the flywheel pulled off of it. So I think I'm going to go ahead and either see if I can find somebody that can pull this flywheel off for me, or else I'm going to order a part. So we'll check back later and see what we've got to do here. Okay, so we got our tool in for removing this flywheel. It's actually designed so that it'll remove two different sizes of flywheel. I've got it set here so that we can remove this one. We're just going to screw this in here. Go ahead and get it down snug. And then we're going to hold this bottom bolt while we turn this top bolt. Put a little pressure on it. And that pull that flywheel off of there. And now I'm going to take a look in here and see if we can even get to this bearing. So this bearing, what's going to happen, we're going to have to push the crankshaft off the bearing, and then we're going to have to push the bearing out of the case. And it's probably a press fit, which means I'm probably going to have to do this with a press. I'm going to go ahead and pull this apart so that we can just do both sides while we're doing it. So the next thing that I am going to do is I'm going to remove this handle. And I'm going to do it by removing these two bolts right here. There's another bolt here on the bottom. That one. And then we can take this handle and set it off to the side. And then I'm going to remove the fuel tank and that stuff. And to do that, what we're going to do, we are going to pull these little plastic covers right here out. Just take your screwdriver and work them out. There's one there. I have to pull this piece right here off to get to this one. I will put that screw right back in there for the time being. And we will pull this cap. And down inside of here we have some screws that we're going to pull. Now, pull those screws out of there. And we'll go to the other side of this saw. We're going to pull this cap right here. Maybe. And then we'll pull the two screws from this side. Might have to use a different tool for that one. We'll set that off to the side. And then this, I'm going to have to pull this little wire out of here. And we are going to have to disassemble this tube right here. And we do that by prying this little hose right here off, and then this whole assembly should just slide off here. Now we're going to need to remove this side cover off of this. This thing looks like it's thrown a chain a few times, kind of beat this case up. That's kind of part of these things. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove the sprocket. We'll do that by removing this little clip right here. This little clip holds the sprocket on. And I may wind up having to get a different screwdriver to do that. I think I got it. clip should slide down to the floor, which means I get to look for it here in just a minute. We're going to pull this off, and then, if I can remember, this clutch should just come off of there. I need to pull this brake off of it. Okay, so we're going to remove this sprocket. There we go. All right, now we're going to inspect this bearing. So this is called a centrifugal clutch. What a centrifugal clutch does is, as the engine speed increases, these little flywheels right here work their way out, so they start to separate. And as they start to separate, they push against this hub and force this hub to move. And what that does is that makes it so that when we idle, it won't turn the chain, and when we start to accelerate, these little weights right here will expand and go against this wheel and cause it to start to operate. I'm going to go ahead and pull this other little piece right here off. We're going to remove these screws to get that off of there. Now this piece should come off of there. But again, this saw hasn't been pulled apart for a long, long time. This thing may be really difficult to get off. So we're going to pull this centrifugal clutch off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a stick down in this to hold this crankshaft in place. And then I'm going to take my little impact wrench here and put on this nut right here. Now, one thing we need to remember is that this is a backwards thread, so we won't loosen it the normal way. We'll loosen it as if we were tightening something. And then that pulls this clutch off. And then we're going to pull this little washer here. And we'll pull this piece here, and it should give us a visual of this bearing at this point. So it looks like I'm going to need to clean this up a bit so that we can get our oiler apart and get to this other bearing. So it may be that that bearing has to press off of there, but I'm going to pull this oil part apart and we're going to see what we come up with. So I'll take a look at that and then we'll come back and look at it.